All right. I think we are live. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday to everybody around the country. And welcome to Daring Live on a sunny California Thursday afternoon. Let me mute myself here, and we are good to go. Today, actually, I will start with yesterday. Yesterday, we announced our partnership with GHS Strings as our string supplier for our banjos, which is a really, really exciting time for us as a company. It's been many months in the making, so we thought it would be very cool to have a very informal chat about strings with two people who know a lot about that subject. With me today, we have Mr. Jens Kruger, and we also have Mr. John Moody of GHS Strings. Jens, of course, is probably one of the most prolific banjo players in the world and guru of all things technical and science when it comes to the banjo, particularly when it comes to Deering banjos. John is the manager of digital brand development and product development at GHS Strings. And welcome both of you to Deering Live.
Oh,
thanks.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Absolutely.
All right, it's a pleasure. So let's kick it off, Jens. I know you got a banjo in your hand. Hold it up real quick. What are you holding? Just so we know.
I just hold the eagle too. An eagle Deering.
But it's not a regular eagle too. Is that your nice eagle too?
That's my nice eagle too. And actually, you know, Greg carved the heel and made me a nice one. It's got an oil finish, so it actually sounds good.
Right, play us a little song. Just ludicrously good.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're here to talk about some strings today.
Yes.
Anyone just joining, and thanks everybody for joining us today and watching you. Let's start off. I want to start with you, Jens. And by the way, just so people didn't know, David is here as well. David, say hi real quick.
Yeah.
Can't hear you. That's okay. So David Benjowski is with me, but Jens, for me, as maybe a musician who isn't quite as up there in the realms of incredibleness that you are, there's a lot of people out there that really kind of underestimate the importance of strings, particularly good strings, right? They kind of see a set of strings and a lot of people know what's going on with them, but there's a lot of people that don't. And so can you break it down for us? Like particularly as it relates to a banjo, what's going on with the strings as far as the physics of it, but also how different strings affect the tone, different metals and that kind of thing. Give us your rundown.
Well, basically, you know, when you start off playing an instrument, you don't really hear the difference that much, you know, between different strings, because some people keep on the factory strings, you know, from some instrument they just bought somewhere, and they're fine with it. But after a while, you start to realize, you know, that you cannot tune them really well, and they sound really dead and dull, and then you have to replace them. And that's really when you have your first question about what kind of strings should I get. And I think, you know, a good string is packed well. I mean, that sounds a little strange, but you know, you can get strings that are quite old and they already, you know, have a patina on them, and they also age a lot faster because you put them on, and then they start to rust. You know, I mean, they hurt your fingers because they get corrosion. They have corrosion on them and get corroded, and it's just not comfortable to play. So, I mean, there's quite a lot of string makers out there who have really good string, but on a banjo, it actually boils down to the core string that is used, you know. So, because we don't use many wound strings, we have one wound string as the fourth string on the banjo, and usually that's a steel wound or a nickel wound or something like that matter. It's usually not phosphor bronze or something like that. But the other strings, you know, the plain steel strings, and then you can really hear the quality of the material itself. Some of them, you know, let's say you try a Dunlop set or a Diodario set or a GHS set, they will sound different. They will have a different feel to them. For instance, you know, GHS has more fundamental compared to Diodario, which usually has more overtones. You know, more it's a different sound in the overtone spectrum a little bit. And on the other hand, the Dunlop might be the string feels stiffer, even though it's the same thickness. So there's a different, and you have to get used to a string, and you start to like it, you know. And for me as a player, it's the reliability of the string is most important. I need to rely on it, that if I change a string, that's every time pretty much the same as it was. So and then you need to find the right gauge for your instrument and for your playing. If somebody plays really hard, he might need thicker strings, and that's not the only criteria. You also need the right set for what kind of music you're playing. For instance, if you need more sustain on a string, you need more expression on a single string and more sustain, you probably need a thicker string, you know. And if you want more note separation and the string to die out quicker, you might want to find a thinner string, you know. So these are all factors, and you have to, a good bet is that you look what your heroes are playing, you know, the tone that you're looking for, and then go from there. And maybe
yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then just talk us through real quick, before I ask John a couple of questions. You're playing your banjo, you strike the string. What is happening? What are the physics that's happening between the relationship between the string, the resonance of the bridge, and how the sound is created? Because I know that's something that you're really interested in kind of discussing and making sure that people understand.
Well, it's basically, you know, a string is basically a high carbon steel, and it's elastic. It has elasticity to it. You know, it doesn't break. It's that easy, so it can actually bend and goes back to where it was, pretty much, right? And so most of the wire that gets used, I'm not saying everything, is actually most wire that gets produced, it gets produced for car tire industry. You know, it's basically car tire industry wire, high carbon steel for the tires. And then there's companies who pull the string, you know, who actually pull the string into different diameters, you know, and that process of pulling the string we're going to talk about that later, but that's a very difficult process, because while you do that, when you have, let's say you have a gift wrapping and you take the little ribbon and you sort of take a scissor and you pull it and you get a little squirrel, a little, you know, how do you call that?
Like a spiral, like a
little spiral thing.
Ribbon, yeah.
And that happens to a string when you pull it, right, through a hole, basically. And then you have to relax the string again. And the machines that relax the string are crucial to what happens to the string afterwards, because if it's not properly relaxed, you will have a lot more overtones or not in control overtones. You can't see that from the outside of the string, but you can really hear it instantly. Now, anyway, that was, but what happens, you strike the string moves out. That means it needs to stretch, you know, because it can't, you know, it needs to stretch. And then it goes back, goes to the other side. It's like a pendulum, goes back and forth. And that energy then goes onto the bridge, and the bridge, you know, moves according to the string. And then that sound gets transferred to the head or to the guitar top or, you know, whatnot, and then puts into air, puts these vibrations into air with the coloration of the construction of the instrument. And let's say if you have a very thick string, if you, let's say, would take a hugely thick string, you would start to hear more and more of the self sound of the string, because the string has a metallic sound to it. So actually a thinner string has less of itself noise, right? So that's why a lot of electric guitar players prefer these days, not like in the 80s where they had, 11s like Stevie Ray Vaughan, or 12s or 13s, on the guitar. Today, a lot of people, play like 8s or 9s, where the string itself has the least self sound, in comparison to the length and the mass it's got, right? And because it becomes a marimba at one point, if you would, exaggerate the idea of the string. And but what happens is basically that you have a flexible high carbon wire that is stretching back and forth, and you want that to be as even and as precise as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much. And you've been playing GHS strings for a number of years now. I don't remember off the top of my head which set you've been.
Well, I always was a Sonny Osborne fan, banjo playing, and he had a set that he promoted once in a banjo newsletter. I think that was in 1980 or 1981 or something, and I just ordered these strings from America. Took forever. I went to a music store in Zurich. You can hear my accent.
This is before Amazon, right?
That was way before Amazon, before I owned a credit card. and so I went to a music store and I had to wait, for these GHS strings, I think 2 or 3 months. And then they arrived and I put them on my banjo and I really didn't like them because they were a little bit too heavy compared to and my banjo was just not a good enough instrument to really, carry with these strings. And I was a little disappointed, but I was such a fan of Sonny Osborne that I just stuck with the strings. I just loved them, got used to them. And I still play the Sonny Osborne set, basically. It's like an 11, a 12, 13, 22, 11. And that's been going on for 40 years. Yeah.
So that segues wonderfully into Mr. John Moody. Are you there?
I am here.
Excellent. Well, first of all, Jens touched a little bit on the importance of, when you're picking a set of strings.
Right.
One of the things that really kind of got us going with GHS was your nitro packaging.
Oh, yeah.
And
sure.
So before we jump into that, though, tell us a little bit, how long have you been with GHS now?
I've been with GHS for just a little bit over 7 years.
Okay.
I started, I came through it originally as an artist endorser myself because I'm a bass player first. In the musical theater scene here. And I just kind of lucked into starting out as the social media position. And then just kind of as I'm learning everything, learning how things are done, kind of get taken under the wing of the guy that was the product development person who was at that point kind of semi-retired. He'd come in a couple of days and things, and he would start walking me through, okay, this is what, how you take a string from the beginning to the end, and here's all the procedures we do in place, here's how things are wound, here's the considerations and stuff. And so when it came to be time for him to fully retire, when he decided he'd rather go fishing instead of come in, so he told the boss, he says, John's already got it, just let him take this ball and run with it, he'll do great. Wonderful. So, yeah, and that's so I've been officially in that position, I want to say about 3 years now.
Very good. And how much of that position is involved, like working with companies such as Deering or other string instrument manufacturers and people like Jens, for example?
It involves a lot, because we're not a huge company, so there's always a little bit of bleed over in terms of positions and things. But yeah, it's very much product development. Is a lot of artist relations and things of talking with people like Jens and to find out what their needs are on the instrument and how we can either do that with strings we already have or start a conversation of, okay, what are some things we could do to make something like that? And that goes along the same lines with like a company such as Deering that would come and say, hey, this is what we're looking to do. And we can start that conversation of, okay, this is how we can do it. Here are the options we have that that either we currently do or, hey, this is what we can do to make something special for you guys.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And that was, again, one of the things that we liked about GHS the most was that kind of smaller company relationship. You put in the emphasis on customer expectations, producing a quality product that kind of complements what we feel is our product, which is a high quality product,
Right.
and making it sound as good as we can. So we're really, really thrilled to be having joined forces earlier this year. And as you know, we announced the packs yesterday. We've got
Yes.
more product lines hopefully to be announced later on this year. Mr. Kruger's eagerly anticipating that conversation.
Right.
We'll take care of that, I'm sure. But packaging.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things Yen said, as far as when you're picking your strings, good packaging, longevity, being fresh. And in fact, I've already had one question from Will H. And maybe you can segue this in. What is the shelf life of a new unopened pack of Gearing GHS strings, which of course incorporates the Nitro packaging?
The Nitro pack,
So,
yeah. The Nitro pack was something that came out, we did it about 4 years ago in 2016. Actually, the first person that helped prototype for us was David Gilmour, actually, his guitar tech, because it was the same thing, we'll send stuff to people on the road, sometimes in just long sleeves if they like it like that, but sometimes a lot of techs like to have everything in individual envelopes like you would get at a store. So we would do that, and he was finding, because just some of the humidity areas where they were traveling, like Jens was saying, some of those strings, if it's not protected correctly, can start to corrode in the packaging while you're waiting, just because the air will get into it and things like that. So we found this this way to make them, just called Nitro Pack, which really is just, you put them in just a little sleeve and it's shut. It's almost, I want to say the machine that makes it for us originally is also used in the coffee industry for sealing bags of coffee. So basically what happens is the little sleeve that we have comes in, they throw the string in there, and then it's heat sealed. But what we do is, in order to open that sleeve up so the string can go in, we actually puff nitrogen into that. And nitrogen, obviously, it has, is not corrosive at all. Yeah. So in that environment, it's completely oxygen free. So because of that, it answers the issues we ever had with any of our artists that would be like traveling anywhere. Like our South American artists have noticed a huge difference in that kind of thing. Obviously, Dave Gilmour's tech was ecstatic about it. There's, because, hey, we don't have to throw away any of these strings anymore. They're perfect. And so we made the joke before, and this goes to the question, is that you could keep these strings on your shelf, in a closet, wherever you want, probably for decades. We'd obviously, we hope you don't, we want you to play them. But because it's a completely oxygen-free environment, there's nothing that's going to affect those for a very, very long time.
That's pretty amazing, actually. And I hope that answers the question. That was longer than I was actually expecting. And I have a set here. I don't know whether you can see it. So this is the foil pack that they now come in. I just completely tore the front of that by mistake, so apologies there. But what John's talking about are the nitro sets, right? So each string is 10, 21, 13, 11, 10, and they're completely sealed inside the pack.
With a nice clear on the back so you can actually see the string. And which actually a lot of people have really, they've said that's been one of the biggest benefits they feel, because they can look through it and find it as easily through the front or the back.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
That's really cool. That's a great explanation. Thanks, John.
Yeah, you're welcome.
David, I'm going to have you jump in for a minute while I do some stuff on the back end here, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Why don't one thing people don't know, a lot of people, could you just explain maybe, John, the difference in a wound string and an unwound string?
Oh, sure. The wound string, well, let's start with the plain string. The plain string, like Jens said, it's just a piece, of high carbon steel, usually with a tin plating on it that runs the length of the instrument that you use. And A wound string is a string that starts out with a high carbon steel like that, but it's usually in like a hex shape or a round shape. And then other round materials are wrapped around it. So if this is the string, it's going like this. The machine's going like this to build up a gauge. So unlike let's say like a plain 20, where that regular high carbon steel wire would be, a 20th or a 20,000th of an inch by itself, a wound 20 would probably have something like a 10,000th of an inch core wire with then a probably 5,000th of an inch cover wire that's wrapped around the perimeter to build up to that final gauge.
Okay, and why what's the benefit of a wound string? Why do instruments get wound with partial unwound and partial wound?
I think some of it is utility in terms of they can't have to have a just a straight steel rod that starts getting into these giant diameters would be extremely stiff and put a whole lot of strain on the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So some of it was a give and take that way. But the other way is too, that's how you can start coloring the sound a little bit. I usually tell people the differences of wound strings are like if you're going to paint your kitchen, let's say like a nice yellow, the hues of yellow that are out there are vast.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might like a very, very bright yellow. Some people may like more of a golden yellow. And they're both yellow, but they both sit at different ends of that hue.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same with when you do with wound strings, putting materials over it, you're going to color the sound a little bit and either keep it very bright and like chimey,
Mm-hmm.
almost with like a chime tone at the very attack, or you're going to have a nice warmth and fullness to it.
And Jens, why is there on a 5-string banjo one wound string and
Well,
three?
the basic, that was great, John, that you talked about that. I might add, for if you have a very thick, if you have a very thick, let's say a 20 gauge, 20 thousandths a steel core, and not only would it be very stiff, it would also not really be flexible, to move out far. So in order to overcome that problem, you just take a small core that is actually fairly flexible in stretching, but you have to add mass in order to slow the movement, right? Because it's a bigger mass that you have to move through space. And so you just add mass to that, and you can do that by winding the string. And the idea of winding is because the string still stays flexible, because the winding goes like that, and the string is flexible, and because of the small core, it pulls the winding apart a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And in some cases, the winding is actually put on while the string is under tension. So when the string is under tension, that the winding is relaxed. So there's different ways of doing that, but the basic concept is to have a small core. I mean, a reasonably small core that is as flexible as the other strings. Let's say, a third string on the banjo would be a 13, right? So or a 14, something like that, or 12. And then if you had the fourth string, you don't want it to be a 20. That would be really weird to play. So if you then put let's say another 12 on there, like John said, a 10 or something, or 11, and then you wind it, and then you play it. It has the same flexibility as the 13, but moves slower because it has more mass, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that is actually the idea of why you wind strings, to add mass to a flexible core. And you try to keep that in the relation of the cause of the tonal expectations of the instrument. And in the banjo, as soon as you move above a 16, it will take a long time for the string to sound good on a banjo. Uh-huh. Because if you have, let's say, on a dobro, you can have an 18 as a first string, for instance, right? And that 18 will sound fine, or a 16, 17, 18, because the dobro reproduces less of the overtones than, let's say, a banjo would, because the membrane being so thin on a banjo. Now, if you take a 16 or 18 gauge string and you put that on a banjo and you tune it up, you would have a lot of these really high-pitched overtones and the marimba sounds that I was talking about of the string itself being transferred by that really thin membrane of the banjo, and it would be very unfavorable to the tone, because the tone would become unpure for what we perceive, through the air, because the banjo is reproducing all of that, all of the things that we don't necessarily want to hear. And so as the 22 is really already, in that the pitch of the string is, and to the length is already in that parameter where you would really like to have a wound string in order to not create more overtones than you necessarily want.
And then that kind of goes into, you're using the Sonny Osborne set, right? Which is, you said, is 11, 12, 13, 22.
Yes.
And so they're kind of really, the first three strings are really close together in gauge. And
yes, there's a reason. I mean, banjo strings, if gauging in banjo strings used to be, they used to be very thin. When you look at the 30s, in the 30s where tenor banjos and plectrum players played, the strings were very thin. There were sometimes 8s, 9s, and there were rarely 10s. They were like, very, very thin strings. And then as time moved on, even when Earl Scruggs played in the 50s, a lot of the strings, like the Bell brands or, all the strings that he bought, they were like in the 9s or 9.5 range. They were never a 10. But in the 70s, all of a sudden, the strings started to emerge, with the Vega Banjo Company, having strings like 10, Vega Medium, they had a 10. But user 11 was pretty much unheard of for a banjo until Bill Keith came along. Mm-hmm. And Sonny Osborne then liked that idea. It gives you just a little bit more, because there's more mass on the string. I can have more expression on an individual note on the one string. So the banjo's really playing a lot of notes rolling, but I can have more mid-range and tonal oomph, and sustain on an individual string if I have a thicker string. And so when you play slower things as well, it actually it really helps, So, but like I said, that's really a personal style thing, of what you are used to, there's not a rule, really.
No. You got to experiment and kind of.
Yes, right. Yes. Yeah. Right. And other people have experimented before you, like like with GHS. I mean, when I was a kid, I saw all the ads about GHS and who was playing GHS, and of course, I thought, okay, they must be good because the professionals play them. I mean, that's how simple it is. When you start off, and then you found out, yes, they are actually really good, because all these people like Bela Fleck and all these great players, well, they tried everything. I mean, they're not playing the strings. They're not playing GHS because they get strings for free. They play these strings because they're the best strings they can find. So and then you play them yourself, and you really find, yes, they're really spoiling me. They really come back. They're really reliable, and then you just start trusting that brand, and that's exactly what happened.
And why do most banjo players, especially 5-string banjo players, not use phosphor bronze wound strings? I know the Bill Keith set was a phosphor bronze, I believe, and then some clawhammer players do, but definitely bluegrass players generally are using nickel or.
It's hard to say. Sometimes I feel like the nickel wound, that I have, is, what is it? Is a steel wound, right? Is just lasting a little longer, sounding the same. And if I have, let's say, just a regular bronze, they corrode fairly quickly under my hands, and that also depends on the sweat you have or the acid in your fingers. So I've seen people play, let's say, a regular set of bronze strings, that don't last so long in my style of playing on guitar, for instance. But I've seen people, play them forever, and they sound good on them. And but they don't work for me. But GHS, has these nickel strings and steel strings, for acoustic guitar. They're just unbelievable. My brother plays them, and they're just the best recording strings, that's what he uses all the time, And so like I said, that really depends on the individual, likings,
And that gives you, the phosphor's generally going to be like a warmer sound. The nickel's going to give you a little bit more top end, right? Would you say? Or am I incorrect there?
You see that the thing is sometimes strings when they're new, they all sound pretty bright, and then you just want to play them in a little bit, and then it depends on the instrument. You see, there's just instruments who really produce a lot more of that frequency that the string produces. If I talk to, especially people who use wound strings, like guitarists, they play, 4 wound strings, and they use different sets on different guitars because there's a different overtone response, to the strings. They're not just having one set for all their instruments most of the time. They know on that guitar, I like a phosphor bronze, and this, I like that, and this guitar can even take a string that's coated, or and on this guitar it sounds like plastic.
Yeah. You bring up a good thing, Jens, too, because a lot of times when I talk to artists and things like that, and they say I'm looking for something different, in whether it's just somebody that's already used our strings before, or they've used somebody else and they're looking to try something, the first thing I'll actually say is, okay, what is your guitar like?
Yes. Right.
What's the character of your guitar? And then it's like, okay, what do you like about that sound? And then is there something you could change? And then usually the part where they say, oh, I wish, it had a little bit more bass response, or I wish it could do that. That's where you start getting those more, you can really drill into what they're looking for. And that's where you can bring into like the different kind of metals used for wound strings that really help them find that sound they've been looking for.
Yes, right. That's exactly right. Do you at GHS, do you use different platings on the strings as well, just on the plain strings?
Yeah, we've got 2 main ones. We've got like the standard tin, and then we've got a brass plated one that we've used on a couple of sets as well.
Yeah. How would you describe the difference between the brass and the tin?
It's subtle, but I want to say the brass is it's a smoother sound. It's still very bright and lively, but it feels like it's not there isn't that real big punch right at the very beginning of the note. It's more of just like a little bit of a push in there that kind of evens out a little bit more.
Yes.
What kind of set are we talking? We're not talking banjo sets, are we? Those are kind of more for, I would say, guitar sets, I assume, or bass sets.
We could make a banjo set with brass plated strings. That would be
well,
kind of
brass.
Cool.
Brass is great because it's got zinc in it. Brass is zinc and copper. So it's makes it nice and soft as well. Well, tin is as well,
right.
Of course.
Yeah, that would be interesting to try to use some of the brass plated plain strings on a banjo. I'd be curious how that would sound.
I've never heard that. But it's interesting, whatever. The plain strings, on the plain strings, you can basically hear the quality of the company. I feel like. What they are aiming, what they are going for, when you hear it, because it's the naked truth of the core, of the string, and it's just interesting how different manufacturers are. Even though I think at one point most people, most companies got their core wire from Mapes, if I'm not mistaken. And then use that as a core wire. And I think Mapes is they're from Elizabethton, Tennessee. And they are one of the leading string pullers in the world. They make piano wire. Yep. And I think they're delivering for Steinway and, very numerous, very renowned companies in the world, and been trusted for many, many years. I mean, it's like your company. I mean, you've been in business since 1964, right? With GHS.
Correct. Yep.
And Mapes has been around a long time, making piano wire, and they delivered, most of the wire for, let's say Fender or all kinds of manufacturers, but and so you didn't know. And then I think the Addario went off to have their own string pulling and relaxing a plant.
Yep.
which then really changed the sound of the Diodario strings drastically, you know, from pretty much one year to the next. Not on all their models, but on particularly the banjo strings, you know. And like I said, you know, I think the core wire, you can tell at the core wire when you re-listen to it how well, not just the material is, but how well it is pulled. First of all, the pulling is not that difficult of a process. I mean, it's complex, but it's not that difficult, but the relaxing is. So you got to have, these are huge machines, right, John? You know, you've seen these machines, you know, they're like, I don't know, as long as my house. And,
right.
And these, you have to imagine these strings, you know, they get pulled through these wheels. And Greg Deering, he took me once to a place, you know, where they sell these old machines or where they're standing around. And if they're not really relaxed well, then there's no chance for them that they have a really true overtone spectrum. There's just no way. And there's only a few companies who actually pull the string and relax it well in the world, you know. But then that's up to the company's philosophy, you know, of what they think is a good sounding overtone spectrum. You know? I wouldn't say that there's anybody out there who doesn't have a good string.
Right.
But for the banjo, that is so rich in overtones, very, very rich and responsive to overtones. It's so crucial. And that's why I got so interested, because, you know, I tried all kinds of strings. And when you're on the road, sometimes you remember these things when you go to a music store and there's a box and you have all these individual strings, and some of them are from Roto Sound and some of them are from, and then you just try to find a 10 or an 11 because you busted it on your last gig and you need to replace a few sets and such. And then you try all these different sets and and then you really start to hear these they sound different, you know, they sound different. And I don't want to blow your horn, you know, but GHS, but the thing with GHS is that they truly are for the banjo, the most ideal overtone spectrum, because they just, and especially the overtone spectrum doesn't change much over time.
Right.
You know, they're not like totally dull when you put them on. You remember the strings when we, you know, John, you remember when you started playing, you know, you put on a new guitar set, or, you know, and then they sound dull. The top two strings, the unwound strings sound dull. They're dead. They don't have any response. And then you have to say, okay, I got to play them in and such. And with the GHS, you know, I can put them on pretty much 10 minutes before I go and play a show, right? I can put them on.
That's brave.
They do. I mean, they really do, because I can trust them so much. I can just stretch them and I put them on and just play them 5 minutes and go on stage, and that's it. You know, they stay where they are and they're wonderful, you know, so that says something, you know.
Well, Jens, how often do you change your strings?
I would say I go through about 50 sets a year. So it's probably, you know, about once a week. So, but then there's times where I don't change them that much. I especially change them when I'm, you know, on the road in the summer, or the environment is just, there's a lot of humidity, and or, you know, or I travel a lot, and then I just don't trust it. I just want to put them on, you know. And also when you play every day or you play a show, if the string starts to be has a little corrosion on, it tears up your fingers, you know. It makes your fingers a lot more tired than when you put on a nice new set of strings, you know.
How often would you say for the person at home that just, you know, should they be changing their strings?
I was just going to ask the exact same question. That's probably the most commonly asked thing that we get.
You know, I tell you what, I think, you know, and I had that too, because I had so many students, you know, over the years. But I say, it's like with a shower. Take a shower a month, whether you need it or not.
Okay, John, we're going to scrap the tagline that we came up with, and we're going to run with that. All right?
I think, you know, for somebody who is just, you know, a closet player, just has some fun and goes to a jam session and plays, why don't you treat your instrument with a set of strings, you know, a month? It doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. And I think, you know, just to put them on, it's a nice little ritual, and you get a hang of it. You know, it's not that hard to put the strings on, and it feels so good to put the strings on. Then you have to just sort of, if you have the banjo bridge, you know, once once you put the strings on, you know, then you just have to put the banjo bridge back straight, you know, or just needle back, because with the strings, you know, it moves forward and forward.
Yeah.
The banjo bridge could fall over. And so you learn little tricks, you know, to do that. And but it's really nice to have a new set of strings, and it feels good to have done that, actually.
What's a trick? One thing that I always run into, putting it when you cut the fifth string, so it doesn't leave a little, basically a pin, and it pokes your thumb every time you're playing. Right?
Well, the nice thing, I tell you, I don't want to destroy strings here, but
I'll send you a new set, Jens. You're fine.
Yeah, we'll take care of it. We know some people.
Okay, I'll take a string. It's a nice nitro pack. Okay, I'm going to take the string. I'll show you something. Okay, I have to bite it open, you know, then I inhale the nitrogen and feel really cool. So I can take a string. Now, do you see the string?
Yep.
Yeah.
You see, the nice thing is you can take a string and you just make a loop. You see that? Like that. And you pull it together.
Move it up.
And then you just pull it apart. You see that?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. The other thing is you can just take a string and just make a loop and then pull it apart. See?
Wow.
Okay.
And when you have a banjo, when you have the banjo and you put the string in, you see, I don't have any ends.
Right.
When children grab a headstock, they usually hurt themselves. So, and I hurt myself many times. I don't know how many times I stuck a string in my finger, and then you have this mixture of sweat, a little bit of dirt, and blood.
Yeah.
Right.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
We've all been there, and especially also with the fifth string. So what I do with the fifth string, I take my fifth string off. So I'll show you what I do, so you can see how it looks.
Whole workshop here.
Yeah, it's nice. If you see, when you look at this, I take the string and I pop it apart, like I said before. I pop the string apart. I mean, I put it in, put the string in, and then I go up to here about, and then I make a little loop and pop it apart, and then I make a little. You can see that I make a little.
Okay.
And I just take it by hand and just make a little hook, right? And then I put the string, which is already in here, basically, because I do all that while the string is already in the tailpiece. And then I just put that little hook into the hole of the fifth string peg, wrap it around twice, and then just turn it, and then I just wind it up. You know,
it just back out. It stays there.
It just stays there, and then I don't have anything looking out. And that, I mean, you could also just wind it up and then take a plier and then cut it off. It's just what I do. You asked.
I'm going to give a shout out as well to our VP of operations here, Chad Kapotic. He also on our string change video, he does have a little trick on the fifth string specifically as well. When you can feed, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's a similar principle. But you kind of feed it kind of halfway in and then back out on itself, and then when you bend it, you're using the string going through to kind of do that same break off, so it kind of pulls itself back into the hole again, and thus you don't get the pokey bit.
I show you the coolest trick I know about strings changing, if you like me to.
Sure.
Go for it.
See, okay, I take the fifth. I take a string off, the fourth string. Let's say the 22. Okay.
Speed change contest. Here we go.
I guess so.
It's great. This is actually a trick that a Canadian musician, Dennis Larrabee, showed me 40 years ago. So when I put the string in, I don't know if you can see this, I put the string in here, okay? And then I just keep the string away a little bit, not too far. And then I go one above.
Oh, yep.
And then I go underneath it, and this is nice. With a banjo, you can do that because the ratio of the tuning peg is not like 1:16 or 32 or something. Now comes the cool thing. I'll show you. You take a string. And then you just grab it very close. Can you see that? Can you see it? You just grab it really close, and you just go over once and really pull, and then go over to the other side, and the string's off.
There you go.
Okay, and and there's nothing. So you don't need a clipper, or need to clip it off, and so that's easy, right?
Right. Thank you.
That's great, Jens. Thank you very much, because I didn't see that on the Peghead version before. That's similar to what Chad does as well. So that's yeah. Without the clipper, the string clipper sales have just declined dramatically.
Well, no, my brother, he uses the string clippers, on the guitar. It's just what he's used to, He's got also a little string winder on that clipper thing, and it's really handy. So it really works well for him,
So just on the subject of restringing, and just, John, going back to you a little bit, I wanted to talk about the other thing that I'm really impressed with on the GHS string is the lock twist system.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and what it is and what it means for artists like Jens, but also players at home as well?
Actually, let me see here. I can actually.
Oh, this is the most demo live session we've done.
I'm going to draw a picture because it's probably the best way to do that.
Oh.
So the lock twist is for how the string at the very end, the loop or the ball end is locked onto the plain steel string. Normally, let's see if I can do it like this. When you've got your string and we've got our loop like this, then they wrap, it'll wrap something around like so. Just a couple of loops around, then it has just a regular piece like this. And that's how we create the loop. That's the loop that goes onto the bridge that holds the string.
Can you hold that up to the camera just a little bit?
No, I'm sorry. There we go.
Okay. That's one of my better pictures. That's cool.
I know. I'm like, believe it or not, I used to be a graphic designer. But what GHS does, I'll put it down below it, is we do our real loop, but then we go back on it just for a little bit to lock it in.
Got it.
Like that. And so what that does, the big part, and it kind of plays into what Jens was saying about how he trusts those strings to be able to change them 10 minutes before showtime, is that there's much less stretching needed when those strings are on as they're settling onto the instrument, because the lock twist is basically on those other strings is just clamping down on it and making sure that that loop's not flexing at all under where it's supposed to be locked in there. And because of that too, that also helps intonation, setting it and keeping it for the duration of the string life.
Yes. Right. May I add something to that? I think because when you look at the tailpiece, look at the tailpiece. Wait a second, I'm a little bit more light here. You look at the tailpiece, right? The strings run over the tailpiece. And then basically that lock you're talking about is basically right on top of here.
Okay.
Now a lot of strings actually they're wrapped around, but then they sort of have a loose end that looks out.
Yeah.
And then when you touch the tailpiece, you cut yourself. Right. Now with these, you don't. You see that nothing happening. Right. It's all tight and nice. So that's another advantage of your technique.
Yeah. There you go.
And then some other brands I've had before where the loop actually comes undone.
Right.
While you're trying to put it on.
Yeah, I've had that. Yep.
Right.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, those are the kind of the two redeeming features I think about moving to GHS and looking at those things, the details that make a difference.
Yeah.
And they'll make a lot of people very happy. I know a number of customers that I spoke to yesterday, some of whom I know pretty well at this point, are very excited that we made the switch. So that's cool. I want to go back real quick because there's been a few people asking the same question.
Okay.
Gold plating on strings, has it been done? Does it work? And more to the point, why not just straight gold?
Oh man, actual gold plating. I mean, you probably could.
Haven't tried it though.
I haven't tried it.
No, okay.
My guess would be, the big thing too is you got to remember when we buy material, it's in giant spools, and it's by the pound kind of thing, So we'll get a spool like this big of core wire that makes, however thousand tens or whatever. And the price goes up kind of exponentially depending on the material that you use. Obviously, like if we buy a pure nickel wire for something instead of a nickel plated wire, the pure nickel is going to be a lot more. So we probably haven't done a gold plated string, probably because it's a lot of money to buy just the regular material first. I'd be curious on, an actual gold plated or even a gold string, but I think at the same time, I'm not sure anybody would want to buy it just from the onset.
Well, no.
Jens wants.
No. I think with plating comes off as well,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and also gold is pretty heavy as a plating. I think, well, it's just such a thin layer. It would look cool and it would not corrode. It looks great. I mean, it obviously would be a good solution. I mean, a full gold wire wouldn't be coming back. It would be just you would stretch it, or it's too soft. It probably would sound very, very poor. So that would be. But I think there's guitar strings made, by companies that were gold plated. I've seen them before. Never tried them.
Yeah, I think there've been a couple that I've seen.
Yeah, and that's probably it might be a good idea. I don't know, but let's say, if somebody changes a set of strings, every month or every 2 weeks or whatever, if somebody's really playing every day, 2 weeks or 3 weeks is a good frequency, but then he wouldn't. The strings are not corroding anyway that much, especially not when they come out of a pack as fresh as they are now. It's like I get your strings always 50 sets at the time, right? And so I got my sets laying around. I got them in my bag, over my travel bag, and I don't have to worry about them. And then I take them out. They're fresh, and I know they're gonna stay, good for a long time. But I used to have, sets, even from you guys, even from GHS, that I bought somewhere, and they were in the music store. I don't know how long, and I bought them, and then you have them on, and 2 days later they're already shot,
Yeah.
So, and it makes a huge difference,
Yeah, for sure.
It's a good point, actually. This is an argument that comes up time and time again, and it applies less to banjo just because, like you said earlier on, Jens, we only tend to have one wound string on. But when you're talking about strings, particularly on instruments in music stores, one of the trends that I've seen is from manufacturers of musical instruments, particularly, is using a coated set of strings. Now, there's definitely a manufacturer out there that specializes in it. I've used them. I'm not personally a massive fan, but the challenge has always been on the banjo strings is because they're single wires for most of the strings. Have there been any advancements in kind of string technology that would allow for like single strings to be kind of coated and protected in the same way that the guitar strings have been over the years?
Actually, we have a set of banjo strings kind of like that. They're not coated per se. What we did was they're cryogenically treated instead. It's an old technology. Actually, Dean Markley originally came out with it with the blue steels.
Got it.
Where basically you take the strings, you freeze them down to very cold. I mean, I wish the place we sent them to is, I think, a place called 360 degrees. But they freeze them and then bring them back up to temperature. And by doing that, it affects the string on a molecular level, kind of tightens it up and makes it a little bit more durable that way. And the plus on that, it's not so much, I guess, I don't know how much you notice it on like the plain steel strings, but you definitely notice that on wound. Like when a wound string is coated, you can definitely tell, just from hearing it.
Yeah.
So we like to say that like the cryogenically treated is more of the get an unwound sound but a wound longevity.
Okay.
So that, I mean, that's been one of the more recent technologies that we can use for that.
So when you coat your strings, John, are they entirely coated, or is the winding itself coated?
No, the winding itself would be coated when we do it. So yeah, we get the cover wires coated on a wound string, and then we wind that over the plain steel core wire. Unlike the one that Jamie was alluding to, that they'll coat the finished string.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you know, that's it's actually a very good technique, because if you have a coating over a finished string, the problem is that the string becomes extremely slick.
Yeah.
Now, that has some advantages for some slides and such, but if you want to hold a chord on a guitar for a longer period of time, or you really need to move the chord, you want some grip of the actual string. You want to feel a resilience, resilience of the string, on your fingers, not just being so slick, because it starts to become very painful to hold the hand in the position with a slick string. So that's what I hear a lot of times, of people who play just the total string covered in a sleeve, in comparison to a wound, to the winding that's covered, because you still have some of the grip left.
Yeah.
Right. You still have some of the grip left, which really helps the player, have a similar feel like an uncoated string to the instrument. Right. But I don't think that a plain steel string, that's tin plated, needs to have another treatment to last longer, because when you go into a music store and you play an old guitar that's been there, the E and the B strings still sound good usually. I mean, they sound good for a really, really long time. I mean, a plain string really doesn't go dead. It becomes just a little weird in the overtone spectrum, maybe a little, and it's not so, it doesn't stay in tune very much. You have to imagine it's like you're pulling a chewing gum. It's not in the same thickness everywhere anymore, because you're stretching it. And so, and even if you, let's say, have your string in a package, and it's, if it's wound up really, really tight, let's say, strings could be wound up from the manufacturer really, really tight. Well, that's going to affect how the string will relax again once you take it out of the pack. Let's say if it would be in there for 20 years, I guess, then it would sort of, start to take the shape of what it was in, and it will not have that same feeling anymore. But I don't think, with the material there is, and how the string, there was a time, when they sold guitar strings, they were straight. Remember them? There was that Nashville straights, they were called. Like, there was like in 78, it was a paper pack, this long, because they claimed that once the strings is, put together in a round shape, that it will never sound good anymore. But that was all just ideas. It's not how it is. I mean,
it's a while back.
It's a long time ago, and it's nice, that what I think is so amazing is that there's still every day there's innovation, people thinking of things and trying things and thinking, what could we do? It's like, the comment we just had, how about gold plating, or how about a gold string? I think these are all really necessary questions, and these are questions that we're asking ourselves all the time still, all the time.
Pretty awesome. Go ahead, Dave.
Stainless steel used. He said he read somewhere that stainless steel used for strings can wear out frets more quickly than other materials.
It's true. Yeah, stainless steel is definitely going to be harder than, like a nickel. In terms, but there's a lot of other things that go along with that. How hard you grip the, your neck on those strings is going to play a little bit on that as well. If you've got just a vice grip on there, you're putting more pressure on those strings than you need to fret the note. Whereas if you just put it enough that you need, you're going to be fine. It's not something that you're not going to be playing for like 2 months with a stainless steel string and say, oh man, I need to get these frets dressed. Just you're talking even with regular use and, going on the road and playing night after night after night, you're going to have to get your frets redressed anyway. After a certain time, it is kind of, they're a consumable on our instruments, but it's, usually a little polish on it every now and again. You're not going to notice anything really.
Yes, well, that's why I use stainless steel frets.
Yeah, that helps
I was
too.
just going to say that. Yeah.
Well, that's we switched over on my banjo to stainless steel, I think 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 12 years on my main instrument, I had to replace them twice.
Yeah.
In 12 years. I used to have to change frets every 2 years, have them dressed every few months.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I dressed them myself, on the road, with little tools and things,
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, so, but if you don't play a lot, don't play so much, then you don't need to change frets that much.
Yeah.
And it's not a concern, it's not even,
Right.
but there was another argument, stainless steel frets would destroy the string.
Yeah, I mean,
and I've not seen that actually.
Yeah.
It's I seriously think these are maybe justified arguments to a certain extent, but they're not in the practical world actually noticeable.
Right.
They're my brother's using stainless steel frets and GHS strings. He just never has problems with it, or on the other guitars, where he doesn't have stainless. It's not no, it's not destroying the strings.
Debunking string myths.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just saying. No, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying, in a practical world, where you really just, work with it, it's not a concern.
Yeah.
It's not really a concern. No, it's just in the summertime, when you play festivals or you play outside or you have a lot of climate changes, strings just die quicker.
Mm-hmm.
When with the winding of the strings, just becomes dull, mainly because you have dirt in between, the winding, that gets in there. I mean, when we were kids, we didn't have money, so we take the strings off the guitar and boil them. Put them in hot water, with vinegar, clean the string, and then take them out, put them back on until the winding would literally fall off the string.
Mm-hmm.
There were different times, but in the summer, you just have to change more. And I have some coated strings on my guitars. I don't play a lot, I play in the studio, and then I have some of your coated strings that I just keep on my guitar. And then if I don't play them for 2 weeks, I can take the guitar out and they still sound good. Another advantage is when you do a production in the studio and you play an entire album with a guitar, you don't have to constantly change strings. Or when you want to go back and you want to fill in another or fix something and you come back, you still have the same sound. The guitar didn't change yet. With the, you can rely on the same sound, and that's an advantage against some of the disadvantages, right?
That's
What's
awesome. Go ahead, Dave.
Like the playing, I get a little splinter on the string. Do you ever get that? Like a tiny little sliding up. It feels like I'm getting almost a cactus needle splinter.
I never had that.
Never had that? Okay.
No.
I wonder if that's something like just a little sliver of like the plating or something just coming right off.
Yeah, it happens a fair amount. I'm playing tenor banjo, maybe because I'm sliding up and down a lot too. I don't know.
It's like, but in the old days, like people like Peabody, the great banjo player, he would take strings and he would have I think it was like a eucalyptus oil balm of some sort, and he would take it out of a jar and he would really smear the entire banjo neck full of this stuff. I mean, and then because he would try to protect his fingers and the strings, they would play the strings for a lot longer period of time than today, but they would smear a lot of oil and all kinds of things on the string in order to keep the string on. But can you imagine how dead a wound string actually sounds when you put some hand lotion on it?
Oh yeah, you're gonna kill that thing right away.
but that's the entire career of Peabody, right? He never used any, and a lot of jazz guitarists in those days did the same thing. They used, hand lotion, and they put that over. I actually saw Chris Thiele once, when he was a kid, he played so much, but then I saw him, and I remember because he had a big jar of Swiss, it was called Swiss hand lotion or something. And he put that on his hands. He took his mandolin and started playing, because his fingers would slide better. And for the tremolos, especially on the lots of slides you do on the tenor, people would use that. But today we wouldn't do that anymore because the strings sound so dead. It's unbelievable how dead they get. It's like dunk. It's like done. It's like dunk. But well, it worked with the very, very thin string and the way that they played it.
And there's a number of products on the market these days as well. I mean, we're talking to John. GHS Fast Fret will probably do a pretty good job.
Right.
Enabling players to slide a little bit better. There's a couple of others that we've stocked over the years as well. So that's a pretty good one. So if you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions here from customers. We have Dave, and forgive me, Dave, if I mispronounce your name, but Pecoraro, I think it is. He emailed this morning, and he's also on the chat today. So hi, Dave. I have a Deering Calico, and I was thinking about buying a Smile bridge. Is there a relationship between the strings with this bridge? And I think that question can probably, Jens, that will probably be for you, but it might expand just in general to strings and bridges. Is there a relationship, with what strings to have with a certain bridge, or is it really, are they two separate independent
Basically,
things?
I mean, the basic rule of thumb would be the heavier the strings, the heavier you can go with a bridge, because you have to see the heavier, if you have a bridge that's heavier, it's harder to move the bridge because there's just more mass on the bridge. And if you want a similar sound, you need to also increase the gauge of the string a little bit to the mass of the bridge. I've tried very heavy strings on very thin bridges, and the result is usually not very pleasant. It's not really good. Sounds very bulky, and you start, like, again, I have to refer again to this marimba effect. I was saying, I'm talking about the core of the string starting to has its own sound, right? Has its own way of sounding, not just the vibration it does, which is the tone we hear, of how tight it is and how fast it goes back and forth. Also, the material itself has a sound. Now, if you have a very thin bridge, it actually transports immediately a lot of these very high overtones, that are in the string, that are moving inside of the string in waves. And then when you have a very thin string and a very thick string and a very thin bridge, you start to have a bulky, very overtone rich, weird sound. It's almost, it has something, well, maybe you like it, but I'm saying in general, it's not that what you desire. But on the other hand, if you take a quite very thick bridge, you can also use thin strings. But the thing is, then you decrease the initial peak of the string. To explain that just a little bit better.
Yeah.
If you look at a tone, it would be very hard to distinguish the difference between a guitar and a banjo if you just listen to the sustain of the note. A lot of instruments sound very similar if you would just listen if you wouldn't hear the peak, you just hear the sustain of the note. It's sometimes difficult to tell the difference between an oboe or a flute. Because the overtone spectrum is somewhat similar, and it's the same with the guitar. But what really is a lot of different on the banjo to the guitar is that the first initial peak is so much higher on the banjo and has a metallic sound because coming from the finger picks, from the way everything moves, from the construction. So in the initial peak, you hear a lot of the character of the instrument. So that was for a long time for synthetic sound production, like on synthesizers and such. It was very difficult to reproduce this first initial, peak of a sound in order to make an artificial sound natural, right? And then you need many different kinds of these initial sounds in order not to sound sterile with this sound. Now, when you look at a banjo construction, you have a fairly heavy bridge, let's say, and you have a thin string. Well, the thin string will start to move, but the energy will not move the bridge as quickly and as efficiently onto the surface of the amplifying construction of that. And because of that, the initial peak will be somehow made, the curve is dampened, similar to a let's say compressor. It would take
Oh,
off.
wow.
It would take off, some of that, and it would change the tone. So the notes run a little bit more into each other, So in order to get more note separation, you would just thin the bridge to a comfortable string thickness you like, and until you have the note separation you desire and the sustain you desire. So it's like dialing in these two factors. Now with the Smiley bridge, it depends if you're buying a 5/8 or 11/16 bridge, of how thick it is. But this general, for the construction of the Deering pot and a head that's around a G or G sharp, and you put a Deering light gauge string set on there, which is a 10, 11, 13, then you would have a pretty good middle of the road setup. So don't worry about the Smiley bridge and the strings. The Smiley bridge pretty much works well with most string gauges really well, because of the Smiley bridge being more flexible in rolling, because the middle foot is a little higher and it has an arch to it. That means the bridge is easier to move and transfer sound onto the board. And that's why the Smiley bridge is a little bit more forgiving with different string gauges.
That's a pretty thorough explanation. We appreciate that, Jens. A great.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm a little lengthy here, but
no. And it's a good opportunity as well, because we do get questions quite a lot. We've had a few today with regards specifically to have a good time or have a Sierra, like what's the best string gauges, and you kind of touched on it, and John did too, but it's always so subjective, right? Strings are always subjective.
But I can give a few pointers here. There was a survey once. Peter Wernick and Tony, I think Peter Wernick, was it Tony Trischka as well? I'm sorry, I don't want to discredit anybody here. But they put a book out called Masters of Bluegrass and Bluegrass Banjo. And that was a long time ago. It was a thick book. And there was a whole group of banjos. And they interviewed, I don't know, anybody in the business, not all the people that were featured in the book, but they did a huge survey who played what, what kind of strings. And it was interesting. It boiled down that for the first string, the most common string was a 10. For the second string, the most common string was 11. For the third string, the most common string was a 13, and a 21 or 22 for the fourth, and a 10 for the fifth. And so that became sort of in the middle of the road set. And for a long time, I think Bela Fleck played that as well, until I think now he plays a GHS set, that has a 12 in the middle instead of a 13.
He plays a couple really crazy ones too. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm saying, but one of the, if I would say just the most standard, just regular set there is for banjo, you can just start off with is a regular Deering light gauge set. And then you can always, get a little lighter. If you, for instance, you're a huge Earl Scruggs fan, and you really want the, this is the light. This is exactly that's that set with the 20 wound and the 10, and that's 21 wound. Sorry.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the set that I would just suggest, for anybody just to go in the middle of the road, because it sounds good if you're playing. Let me demonstrate. If you play something that requires a little bit more sustain, a little bit more. then the 10 is really good. If you really just you want more note separation, and then you maybe want to go lighter, go to a 9.5, like the vintage light or the extra light set even, that's a 9. And you get more note separation. You sound a little bit more like Earl Scruggs and the old banjo players did, in the early days. Because there's just more pop. It just goes a tuk tuk, the sustain sort of drops off. And then you also want to have maybe a little bit of a thinner bridge, just maybe a little bit. But that's just setup questions that we can maybe also talk another time. But I think just to get a regular Deering light gauge set and then go from there, because it sounds great. And a lot of players in the world play that set, and as professional players,
And I was going to say, I brought it up because it really is the set of strings that we fit to the vast majority of our banjos from the production line, with the exception of a small handful.
Yes.
Most of them will get from the Good Time through to a Sierra, through to a Calico.
Yes.
They'll get the light gauge set. So a lot of people ask, what should I get? And that's the one to go for. And after that, like Jens says, you've got different sets to experiment within that Deering range.
Yes.
There's other brands, other manufacturers, which obviously, don't, unless they're GHS, we'll support them. But it's we have a different offerings, and it's just kind of an experimentation thing because it's so subjective to what you're trying to achieve.
Well, so basically, what we did when we came up with the string gauges, for the Deering banjos, I wanted to have reference to historic sets. When you look at the extra light set that we're having, for Deering, it's basically the Vega light set. Of Vega, later Martin Company, that is just a historic set, but I think it's just the better set with the GHS string in it. But it's just a historic set because it's a sound, that Vega light sound. You can hear that on countless recordings of early J.D. Crowe, and then J.D. Crowe, of course, played Bell Brand. And that is then a vintage set, which is like the vintage light is like a 9.5, 11, 12, and the 12 is a little harder to control, but it's almost like a Bell Brand. They're out of business. They've been gone for a long time. And so J.D. Crowe had a signature set, which is also widely used in the bluegrass field. And so when we did the Deering line, we tried to adopt some of these really classic sets, that you have access to these sets through Deering.
Awesome. All right. It's been an hour and 20. Is everyone good on time?
Yeah.
Everyone's cool. All right. Well, we'll go for another 10. I've got a couple more questions here from people tuning in. It's from Maisa, and again, Maisa, I'm sorry if I butchered your name there. Everybody who asks questions always has names that I struggle to pronounce. It's never John or Steve, but we appreciate you all. When we use detuners, and I assume they're referring to the Keith detuners, the tendency is to wear the strings more. Do you recommend a specific model of string for detuners, or is that kind of part of the package of using detuners on your banjo? John or Jens, that's either for either of you.
Well, I would say some of it I think depends on where you're tuning that first one to. If it's one of those where you've got a lighter gauge string up to the thing and then you're tuning it down and up, so you're not putting too much extra tension or anything on it. Because I know some people will usually tune it, have the buy a thicker string so they can have still a nicer sound at the dropped tune, which means it's got a little extra tension when it's tuned up to the regular pitch. So I would say it is a little bit the nature of the beast, because especially depending on how much you use that, especially during a show or things like that, you are changing the tension at which those strings are being put under. And so that continual tightening and loosening of it is going to wear on that particular string or set of strings a little bit more than just tuning them up to pitch and playing it right then.
That's very good, John. That's very true. Also, what I would say is that the string mainly in the D tuner, like for the B, you tune from B to A and from G to F sharp most of the time, or for Randall and Rag maybe up to C, and it's like. But the biggest wear is the knot. Where the string runs over the knot. This is where the string really wears a lot, and a lot of people, I used to do that. I take a pencil,
Yep.
and I just put a little graphite into the knot. I just sort of take the string. And what I do is it's really just very easy. I just lift the string off. I don't even loosen it. I just go in there, and then I just put the string, or I just lift the string up and just go underneath the string with the pencil and just go like that, right here. I can't do it in this position here. It's a little weird, but then I just put that in. So I have a little graphite in here, and then I don't have this crackling sound, that it's not happening. But the unfortunate thing with that is you have to take that out and clean it once in a while, with a piece of paper, or clean it out because it can become gooey. With the string being in there for a long time. But the graphite is a good solution because you usually have a pencil around somewhere, and if it's a special thing you need to put in there, don't try oil or anything. That it's not good. It's going to deaden the string, right, John? It's just going to instant death of a string. Yeah. instant death. But the wear, so I wouldn't worry about the strings in particular. If you use D strings, D tuners, don't worry about it. Just use the set you play. That one step, there's guitars, they bend a tremendous amount. The strings are made for that. They can take that. That's not a problem. And even the high D string, on the banjo, you can tune that easily up to a G, even to an A. You can tune that 10 gauge so much higher than the tension actually is. Let's say on a tenor banjo, the tension is extremely high compared to a 5-string banjo, right? The tension, you always, with the A string, you go like, can I tune it up without breaking it, but with a 5-string banjo, the strings are actually fairly loose. And so don't worry about it. It's all good. The only thing is, like I said, there's some wear on the knot, but that's not even significant. Sometimes if you don't have graphite in there, you run the chance of, if you're using it a lot, that the corrosion of the string can wear down the knot. So it is important when you play a lot of detuning things that you consider maybe changing the strings more often, because you don't want any corrosion rubbing on that knot, because it's going to wear the knot down. So make sure that you got some graphite in there, or change strings frequently, and that'll help. So that's what I would say for that.
That's some great advice, guys. Thank you very much. And I'm probably gonna make this the last question from the chat, and then we'll just open it up for some closing remarks before we head out. But the Julia Bell strings, these come up a lot. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Julia Bell is a banjo that we released in collaboration with Alison Brown 2 or 3 years ago now. And it has its own set, which is a little bit different because the Julia Bell is designed for kind of down-tuned banjo playing in E and F and that kind of thing. So the gauges are a lot heavier, 12, 14, 20, 24, and 12. The question that came up from Colin is, how would the Julia Bell string set sound on my calico, and would these strings, because of the heavier gauge, hurt the banjo neck?
Okay, first of all, it wouldn't. I'm sorry. Do you want to? I'm sorry. I want to just jump in.
Oh no, go right ahead.
I'm talking too much anyway.
You're just talking over me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No,
Jens, you go first.
Well, the Julia Bell strings, they are really fantastic. But I want to add to that, they will not hurt the neck. There's no way. You would have to, adjust the truss rod a little bit. This is, this here, to make the neck sort of straight. So the neck should be pretty straight. If you hold the string down here and you hold it on the here, you should have just a little bit of relief here. Not much, just a little bit, because the straighter the neck can be without rattling, the better your intonation will be. You know, the neck is better in tune. So so when you push the string down here, you can see if you have a little bit of give right here, and that's perfect. So when you put a heavier gauge set on a banjo, well, the neck will make a little bit more of a bow, right? And so maybe you want to have to readjust that a little bit, but you can't hurt the neck. It will not hurt the neck. But there's another slight problem. It's the strings are considerably thicker, and so the knot might be a little bit too narrow for the string to go into the knot. And so there could be the possibility that don't just go ahead and recut the knot, you know, make the slot wider. There's another opportunity that you can do. You can take a file and flatten the knot a little bit, because actually a perfectly cut knot, you would see the top of the string sticking out just a little bit, right? And the string wouldn't be just disappearing into the knot. So you can take, let's say, you can go to somebody that just works it down a little bit and then see if the string could sort of fit in it, right? Because it looks out. Maybe you have to just maybe open the knot slot a little bit so the thicker string has room. Same is true for the bridge. You know, you maybe have to. So you might just want to take a different bridge and just buy another smarty bridge and then make the slots a little bigger so the string can really sit in it. And just very carefully have the knot, maybe just open it up a little bit, and then you can easily go back to a regular set. It will not make that much of a difference, you know. You will not destroy the banjo. And if you destroy the knot is not a big operation. You can just, you know, somebody can, Deering can just put a new one in. It's not a big deal. But
Very
it's not. But what I'm saying is, you can't hurt the neck, and a tuned down banjo sounds great. Not just the Julia Bell, any banjo. You can put these strings on any Deering banjo, and it will sound fantastic. And let's say you have two banjos, and you want to, you know, have one, and then you just use that one as a tuned down instrument, and then you buy these thicker strings. Fantastic. It's super sound. Yes. Any.
John, any thoughts on
you know, Jens hit a lot of it. I mean, like he said, I was going to mention, you know, the truss rod, and then, you know, the thing too is, like you mentioned with the bridge, if you even want to go that far, you can have another nut recut for the heavier gauges. So then you could keep the original, and then you could easily swap those out if you go to a lighter gauge. Using heavier strings at a slightly lower tuning, though, the tension you might find is very comparable to the lighter strings at a higher tension. You know, we find that a lot. That's a big question I usually field mostly with bass players when they do something like go from standard EADG tuning to BEAD tuning on a four string. They think because they're putting a 130 on the bottom string, it's going to have so much more tension. And it's like, no, the bigger string at lower tuning actually has a little bit less tension than what you're used to already. So putting the Julia Bell set on like your regular banjo probably isn't going to do anything to the neck at all that would require, I don't know if it would require a truss rod adjustment at all. You know, you might be surprised.
Yeah, I've tried it, and actually I had to do a little bit of it. But
just
it's okay.
A little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. Very slight, but you could probably live without it. And the thing is also, you know, if you have a thicker string, it's not only the tension that you have to move the mass of the string.
Right.
You know, so you have to have an initial energy source that moves that extra mass of a thicker string. So it feels, even if the tension is similar, you know, you still have to move more mass.
Yeah.
But actually I found that the Julia Bell string, you know, with the thicker string, it feels awesome. Seriously. I mean, it feels really, really good, you know, because there's such a, it feels, yeah, it's like you're eating a piece of chocolate, you know. It feels really good. It feels good on your hands, you know. It feels like you're moving in slow motion very precisely. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, it feels good. The feeling, that extra mass feels really good, you know. Yeah. It's not hindering at all. You know, it's beautiful.
Love it. I love it. That's been a really delightful conversation. We've been talking for an hour and a half about strings. Couldn't believe
Imagine
it.
that.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
Watch out, Joe Rogan. We're coming for you.
Well, we're all enthusiasts, you know, we're all enthusiastic about this. I think because, you know, see, you could play any instrument, you know, you can play any instrument, but you're playing on the strings.
Mhm.
You actually, in the end, you're actually moving strings, right? You, especially your right hand.
Yep.
Your right hand is connected to these strings, no matter what instruments they're on, you know. You feel the weight and the strength and the response and everything. You feel that in your, especially in your right hand, you know, how you pluck the string. It's an amazing, and that's what I would like. That's what I would like to get. That's what I was. How can I say it? I'm happy if that's always pretty much the same. Then I know it's not me. Then I know it's not the instrument. It's me if it's not working.
David Bandrowski, any closing thoughts, closing questions before we head off into the sunset?
We covered everything on my end here.
Yeah. Oh. Hey, Dave, for anyone who doesn't know, plays 5-string banjo and tenor banjo and guitar. So he is constantly changing strings on multiple instruments all the time.
Yeah, David's awesome.
That's right. That's right. John Moody.
Yes, sir.
Closing thoughts from you, sir. Anything you'd like to add to before we head out?
I mean, as you know, aside from the fact that just we're elated at GHS to even be able to work with you all for this. I mean, as if you didn't know, one of the main founders of GHS, their son, David Holcomb, who was our artist rep for a very, very long time, a heck of a banjo player.
Oh.
And he was actually probably the driving force behind our bluegrass presence. So to be able to kind of build upon that legacy on our end by being able to help you with your legacy is just we're elated, you know.
As are we. I think we can all agree. We're strings. There's a lot of people commenting that they've learned a lot from this, which is awesome. That's always the goal. You know, strings are more than just the metal things that hang over the fingerboard. They can make a real difference to how your instrument sounds and feels and produces the notes. And yeah, we're stoked to be a part of the relationship with GHS. And then Jens obviously is a longtime GHS user. It kind of makes a perfect combination.
Well, I'm really happy, you know, that GHS is with Deering because it's just a perfect match. You know, it works really, really well, and not only of what we think, also of what most professional players, you know, have experienced, you know, over the years with GHS strings and the banjo in particular. You know, I think GHS and banjo is a very special marriage, and so for me, this is, and I want to thank you also, John, you know, for the innovations, you know, you keep on pushing and all the things you're looking at. You know, I know it's a tough world out there, and we're all trying, you know, to do the best possible product. And you know, you're still up in Battle Creek, you know, doing your thing, and it's just beautiful to know that you're so true to yourself and to the company, and trying to, you know, come up with, you know, better solutions of packing and new ideas of string wrapping and winding, and I'm just happy, you know. Just keep us posted with all the things you do. You know, maybe we can use it for the banjo as well.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
You know,
yeah. Absolutely. Actually, I will just close with this. One of the early comments in this, and just reading from my second screen. It's not like, just in case anybody tuning in thinks I'm looking away from the camera. I'm not. I have two screens and I'm reading.
Yeah.
I mean, why would actually, once you use two screens, why would you go back to one?
I completely agree with you, 100%. Somebody said, he asked the question, what is different about the Deering strings now that they're made by GHS. And I wrote back in the chat here, you know, at the moment, it's really just that they're Deering specific gauges. They're gauges that we came up with, and that's kind of where we're at. But, you know, just a closing note, it seems like a perfect opportunity to, as we go down the line, we're very much in the infancy of this new start of this relationship. I look forward to working with Jens and David and John and everyone here at Deering and GHS to see what else we can come up with for the banjo and start pushing that envelope forward as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's going to be fun. Mr. Kruger, it would be terrible if we didn't ask you to play us out. Would you mind?
No, not at all.
There we go. All right. Guys, everybody watching, thank you so much for tuning in again. We've loved doing these things. And I think even after the COVID stuff dies down and we can all go out to events again, I hope that's sooner rather than later, but we're going to continue these because they're a lot of fun. We love you guys tuning in. Mr. Kruger, now that he has restrung at least 2 of his strings
Right.
during this session, we'll play it out. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you all. Thank you all. It's fantastic.
Wonderful. Good night. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe out there.
Y'all take care. Bye-bye.